One of the things I don't think a lot of people are expecting is for aemeath to be drip marketed so soon after the release of Lahiroi. Considering we've gone through a lot of the lore and meanings of aemeath and the Exostrider in the previous two videos, I think one of the more prevalent questions is, now that we know she is a fusion resonator, why exactly is she fusion? While basically nothing in her color scheme or design really screams fire or fusion, when we look into the lore, the mythological allusions to Baldur, and other snippets such as the Reactor Husk boss, it's actually really clear when you think about it why exactly she is a fire-themed resonator. So, without any further ado, let's look into it. I think many people are guessing that aemeath would be a Glacial resonator because of her color scheme and the Exostrider currently being in the Royan Frostlands in the middle of a snowstorm. However, one thing that we know from the Roya is that the Frostlands weren't actually covered in ice or snow originally, and that Baldur, the Exostrider, was not the cause of what the Royans call the Great Glacial Lock, which caused the winter storm that forced their ancestors to dive underground into Lahiroi. If you explore the map, there is a really interesting conversation between a Royan man and Academy Resonator, where we get confirmation that this sort of ice age that the Roya talk about is essentially just a lament. Ivar talks about how the first epoch trapped their sun god, Sol, in raging tides, which is quite obviously the emergence of the etheric sea in the sky of Solaris 3, as we know from other sources. This means that this ice age affecting Lahiroi, or Great Glacial Lock as the Roya call it, is actually one of the mass extinction phenomena that affected the world of Sol 3 around 10,000 years ago, after the etheric sea first emerged. The Academy and official sources classify this as the magnetic poles shifting around Lahiroi during this time, which caused this supposed Great Freeze event. The important takeaway from this, however, is that the Exostrider, known as Baldur, was not the cause of this Ice Age extinction event, so it can't really have glacial or ice-based powers. In fact, if we read between the lines of the conversation between Ivar and Valentus, it seems that the opposite is true. Baldur, the Exostrider, was really just trying their best to fight back against the Frenodian Lament, which we now know came into form in Lahiroi as a giant ice age that froze the world above. In fact, Ivar even says that Baldur, the Exostrider, is a sort of divine incarnation of their god, Sol, which really brings us to our next point. In our previous video, we analysed quite heavily how the Roya believed the Exostrider to be Baldur, which we know to be a Norse god. However, while we focus on Baldur's role in Ragnarok in the last video, the supposed end of the world in Norse mythology, we didn't really talk enough about what sort of god Baldur actually was amongst the pantheon in Asgard. Baldur, being the son of Frigg and the king or all-father of gods, Odin, was the most valued and radiant son the couple had, and as such, he's always taken on a kind of princely, honourable character. This makes a lot of sense, because if we look back on Ivar and Valentus' conversation, the Exostrider Baldur isn't actually the Roya's god itself, but a divine emissary of the god Sol, which they sent to walk amongst mortals. The most important part, however, is that Baldur is the god of light in Norse mythology, which not only fits into his role as the de facto son of the Royan god Sol, but also makes massive sense in terms of the construction of the map of Lahiroi. As we know from the previous video, the entire map of Lahiroi was essentially built out of the Exostrider's body, in a very similar way to how Midgard, the land humans reside, was built out of the giant Ymir's body in Norse mythology. However, the most important thing that the Exostrider provided to the humans in Lahiroi is, quite literally, the sun. Its central power unit, the Reactor Drive, was hung up in the sky in order to sustain the entire ecosystem of Lahiroi, which requires its sunlight to survive. The Star Torch Academy's entire Helios project is designed with the express intent to build an artificial sun so that the Reactor Drive can finally return into the Exostrider's body. As you can probably imagine, this has immense parallels to Baldur being the god of light in Norse mythology. In Royan terms, the Exostrider not only quite literally gave them its heart to serve as a sun, but is also an incarnation of their god, or their ultimate authority, the sun god Sol. And when you place all of this together, it makes quite a lot of sense why Baldur, the Exostrider, and in extension aemeath, who is synchronized with it, is incredibly attuned to the fusion elements. 10,000 years ago, when the etheric sea trapped the god Sol in the sky and the ice ages happened in Lahairoi, it was Baldur who fought back against him in order to save the Roy's ancestors with its power of light and fire. In essence, the Exostrider, Baldur, was not the one causing the snowstorms or the ice age, but actually the sun god who was trying to fight back against him. However, there's some more things that substantiate all of this. On the current map of Lahairoi, there are two bosses, being Hyvatia and the Reactor Husk, both of which are created and serve the Exostrider. We've already fought Hyvatia in 3.0 after it lost control, after being corrupted by a Fraxis device, and it is very possible that the very same thing is going to happen to the Reactor Husk in the next update or maybe in 3.1. One of the reasons that this seems to be the case is that the Reactor Husk and how it moves seems to make it look like an analog to Fenrir, the son of Loki, which we now know the Frenodian LF1 is deeply tied to because of its name, Virunga. Fenrir is a wolf who, during Ragnarok, eats the sun. Considering that the next update will most likely focus on Monir and the new solar ceremony, where the Academy launches Helios, the artificial sun, to replace the Exostrider's Reactor Drive in the sky, it does actually seem logical that if we look at Norse mythology, the Reactor Husk, being a possible parallel of Fenrir, would disrupt this process, quite literally or metaphorically eating the sun, and as such, following the path of Ragnarok, which has already been set down by another one of Loki's children, Jormungandr, which was paralleled with Lahairoi's Voidworm in 3.0. However, the real reason I talk about the Reactor Husk is that it seems to link very interestingly to aemeath being a fusion resonator. One of the interesting things I found out about aemeath's drip marketing is its lines about starlight, which seems to be a polar opposite of the Reactor Husk's boss description, which describes how it fights until the last speck of starlight goes dark. This contrast seems to line up with how they are both very connected to the Exostrider, and most importantly, how this seems to line up the fact that both of them are of the fusion elements.
Past sparks pierce the void and illuminate Lahairoi, where the seed of civilization is buried, ready to thrive. Into space we gaze, bound by our desire to return. We shall sever the chains of yesterday. We shall disperse the mists of tomorrow. Raise it up high, the sun that will soon burn. Seek courage from the Firebringer to rekindle that torch. We are sun chasers. We are the shepherds of fire. Together, we usher in a future of light.
All in all, it actually makes an awful lot of sense why aemeath is a fusion resonator if you look into the Exostrider Baldur's history and role. It was very ironic that the last time we had a sun theme resonator, Augusta ended up being an electro character, and this time around aemeath, looking almost like a Glacial resonator, turns out to be the fusion sun-based resonator instead. Anyway, as always, if you've enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a comment, like, subscribe, and if you can spare it, perhaps consider supporting me with a donation or becoming a channel member. But as always, I hope you all have a good day and a new year. Until next time.